Hello there, your imaginary friend. We're continuing on boldly, if I may say, with the narrative of Arthur Golden Pym of Nantucket. Let's just jump into it. Chapter 14. The Jane Guy was a fine-looking topsail schooner of 180 tons burden. She was unusually sharp in the bows, and on a wind in moderate weather, the fastest sailor I've ever seen. Her qualities, however, as a rough sea-boat were not so good, and her draught of water was by far too great for the trade to which she was destined. For this peculiar service, a larger vessel, and one of a light proportionate draught, is desirable. Say, a vessel of from 300 to 350 tons. She should be bark-rigged, and in other respects of a different construction from the usual South Sea ships. It was absolutely necessary that she should be well armed. She should have, say, 10 or 12-pound carronades, and 2 or 3 long 12s, with brass blunderbusses and watertight arm chests for each top. Her anchors and cables should be of far greater strength than is required for any other species of trade, and above all, her crew should be numerous and efficient, not less for such a vessel as I have described than 50 or 60 able-bodied men. The Jane Guy had a crew of 35, all able seamen, besides the captain and mate, but she was not altogether as well armed or otherwise equipped as a navigator acquainted with the difficulties and dangers of the trade could have desired. Captain Guy was a gentleman of great urbanity of manner, and of considerable experience in the southern traffic, to which he had devoted a great portion of his life. He was deficient, however, in energy, and consequently in that spirit of enterprise which is here so absolutely requisite. He was part owner of the vessel in which he sailed, and was invested with discretionary powers to cruise in the South Seas for any cargo which might come most readily to hand. He had on board, as usual in such voyages, beads, looking-glasses, tinder-works, axes, hatchets, saws, adzes, planes, chisels, gouges, gimlets, files, spokeshaves, rasps, hammers, nails, knives, scissors, razors, needles, thread, crockeryware, calico, trinkets, and other similar articles. The schooner sailed from Liverpool on the 10th of July, crossed the Tropic of Cancer on the 25th, in longitude 20 degrees west, and sailed and reached Sal, one of the Cape Verde Islands, on the 29th, where she took in salt and other necessaries for the voyage. On the 3rd of August, she left the Cape Verdes and steered southwest, stretching over toward the coast of Brazil, so as to cross the equator between the meridians of 28 and 30 degrees west longitude. This is the course usually taken by vessels bound from Europe to the Cape of Good Hope, or by that route to the East Indies. By proceeding thus, they avoid the calms and strong contrary currents, which continually prevail on the coast of Guinea, while in the end it is found to be the shortest track, as westerly winds are never wanting afterward by which to reach the Cape. It was Captain Guy's intention to make his first stoppage at Kerguelen's Land. I hardly know for what reason. On the day we were picked up, the schooner was off Cape St. Roque, in longitude 31 degrees west, so that when found we had drifted probably from north to south not less than 25 degrees. On board the Jane Guy, we were treated with all the kindness our distressed situation demanded. In about a fortnight, during which time we continued steering to the southeast, with gentle breezes and fine weather, both Peters and myself recovered entirely from the effects of our late privation and dreadful sufferings, and we began to remember what had passed rather as a frightful dream from which we had been happily awakened, than as events which had taken place in sober and naked reality. I've since found that this species of partial oblivion is usually brought about by sudden transition, whether from joy to sorrow or from sorrow to joy, the degree of forgetfulness being proportioned to the degree of difference in the exchange. Thus, in my own case, I now feel it impossible to realize the full extent of the misery which I endured during the days spent upon the hulk. The incidents are remembered, but not the feelings which the incidents elicited at the time of their occurrence. I only know that when they did occur, I then thought that human nature could sustain nothing more of agony. We continued our voyage for some weeks, without any incidents of greater moment than the occasional meeting with whaling ships, and more frequently with the black or right whale, so called in contradistinction to the spermaceti. These, however, were chiefly found south of the 25th parallel. On the 16th of September, being in the vicinity of the Cape of Good Hope, the schooner encountered her first gale of any violence since leaving Liverpool. In this neighbourhood, but more frequently to the south and east of the promontory, we were to the westward, navigators have often to contend with storms from the northward, which rage with great fury. They always bring with them a heavy sea, and one of their most dangerous features is the instantaneous chopping round of the wind, an occurrence almost certain to take place during the greatest force of the gale. A perfect hurricane will be blowing at one moment from the northward or northeast, and in the next not a breath of wind will be felt in that direction, while from the southwest it will come out all at once with a violence almost inconceivable. A bright spot to the southward is the sure forerunner of the change, and vessels are thus enabled to take the proper precautions. It was about 6 in the morning when the blow came on with a white squall, and as usual from the northward. By 8 it had increased very much, and brought down upon us one of the most tremendous seas I had then ever beheld. Everything had been made as snug as possible, but the schooner laboured excessively, and gave evidence of her bad qualities as a sea-boat, pitching her forecastle under at every plunge, and with the greatest difficulty struggling up from one wave before she was buried in another. Just before sunset, the bright spot for which we had been on the lookout made its appearance in the southwest, and in an hour afterward we perceived the little headsail we carried flapping listlessly against the mast. In 2 minutes more, in spite of every preparation, we were hurled on our beam ends, as if by magic, and a perfect wilderness of foam made a clear breach over us as we lay. The blow from the southwest, however, luckily proved to be nothing more than a squall, and we had the good fortune to right the vessel without the loss of a spar. A heavy cross sea gave us great trouble for a few hours after this, but toward morning we found ourselves in nearly as good condition as before the gale. Captain Guy considered that he'd made an escape little less than miraculous. On the 13th of October, we came in sight of Prince Edward's Island, in latitude 46 degrees 53 minutes south, longitude 37 degrees 46 minutes east. 2 days afterward, we found ourselves near Possession Island, and presently passed the islands of Crozet, in latitude 42 degrees 59 minutes south, longitude 48 degrees east. On the 18th, we made Kerguelen's, or Desolation Island, in the southern Indian Ocean, and came to anchor in Christmas Harbour, having 4 fathoms of water. This island, or rather group of islands, bears southeast from the Cape of Good Hope, and is distant therefrom nearly 800 leagues. It was first discovered in 1772 by the Baron de Kerguelen, or Kerguelen, a Frenchman, who, thinking the land to form a portion of an extensive southern continent, carried home information to that effect, which produced much excitement at the time. The government, taking the matter up, sent the Baron back in the following year for the purpose of giving his new discovery a critical examination, when the mistake was discovered. In 1777, Captain Cook fell in with the same group, and gave to the principal one the name of Desolation Island, a title which it certainly well deserves. Upon approaching the land, however, the navigator might be induced to suppose otherwise, as the sides of most of the hills from September to March are clothed with very brilliant verdure. The deceitful appearance is caused by a small plant resembling saxifrage, which is abundant, growing in large patches on a species of crumbling moss. Besides this plant, there is scarcely a sign of vegetation on the island, if we except some coarse, rank grass near the harbour, some lichen, and a shrub which bears resemblance to a cabbage, shooting into seed, and which has a bitter and acrid taste. The face of the country is hilly, although none of the hills can be called lofty. Their tops are perpetually covered with snow. There are several harbours, of which Christmas Harbour is the most convenient. It is the first to be met with on the northeast side of the island, after passing Cape Francois, which forms the northern shore, and by its peculiar shape serves to distinguish the harbour. Its projecting point terminates in a high rock, through which is a large hole, forming a natural arch. The entrance is in latitude 48 degrees 40 minutes south, longitude 69 degrees 6 minutes east. Passing in here, good anchorage may be found under the shelter of several small islands, which form sufficient protection from all easterly winds. Proceeding on eastwardly from this anchorage, you come to Wasp Bay, at the head of the harbor. This is a small basin, completely landlocked, into which you can go with 4 fathoms and find anchorage in from 10 to 3 hard clay bottom. A ship might lie here with her best bower ahead all the year round without risk. To the westward, at the head of Wasp Bay, is a small stream of excellent water, easily procured. Some seal of the fur and hair species are still to be found on Kerguelen's Island, and sea elephants abound. The feathered tribes are discovered in great numbers. Penguins are very plenty, and of these there are 4 different kinds. The royal penguin, so called from its size and beautiful plumage, is the largest. The upper part of the body is usually gray, sometimes of a lilac tint, the under portion of the purest white imaginable. The head is a glossy and most brilliant black, the feet also. The chief beauty of the plumage, however, consists in 2 broad stripes of a gold color, which pass along from the head to the breast. The bill is long and either pink or bright scarlet. These birds walk erect with a stately carriage. They carry their heads high, with their wings drooping like 2 arms, and as their tails project from their body in a line with the legs, the resemblance to a human figure is very striking, and would be apt to deceive the spectator at a casual glance, or in the gloom of the evening. The royal penguins which we met with on Kerguelen's Land were rather larger than a goose. The other kinds are the macaroni, the jackass, and the rookery penguin. These are much smaller, less beautiful in plumage, and different in other respects. Besides the penguin, many other birds are here to be found, among which may be mentioned sea hens, blue petrels, teal, ducks, Port Egmont hens, shags, Cape pigeons, the Nelly, sea swallows, terns, seagulls, Mother Carey's chickens, Mother Carey's geese, or the great petrel, and lastly, the albatross. The great petrel is as large as the common albatross and is carnivorous. It is frequently called the breakbones, or osprey petrel. They are not at all shy, and when properly cooked are palatable food. In flying, they sometimes sail very close to the surface of the water, with the wings expanded, without appearing to move them in the least degree, or make any exertion with them whatever. The albatross is one of the largest and fiercest of the South Sea birds. It is of the gull species, and takes its prey on the wing, never coming on land except for the purpose of breeding. Between this bird and the penguin, the most singular friendship exists. Their nests are constructed with great uniformity, upon a plan concerted between the 2 species, that of the albatross being placed in the center of a little square formed by the nests of 4 penguins. Navigators have agreed in calling an assemblage of such encampments a rookery. These rookeries have been often described, as my reader may not all have seen these descriptions, and as I shall have occasion hereafter to speak of the penguin and the albatross, it will not be amiss to say something here of their mode of building and living. When the season for incubation arrives, the birds assemble in vast numbers, and for some days appear to be deliberating upon the proper course to be pursued. At length they proceed to action. A level piece of ground is selected, of suitable extent, usually comprising 3 or 4 acres, and situated as near the sea as possible, being still beyond its reach. The spot is chosen with reference to its evenness of surface, and that is preferred which is least encumbered with stones. This matter being arranged, the birds proceed with one accord, and actuated apparently by one mind, to trace out, with mathematical accuracy, either a square or other parallelogram, as may best suit the nature of the ground, and of just such sufficient size to accommodate easily all the birds assembled, and no more. In this particular, seeming determined upon preventing the access of future stragglers who have not participated in the labor of the encampment. One side of the place thus marked out runs parallel with the water's edge, and is left open for ingress or egress. Having defined the limits of the rookery, the colony now begins to clear it of every species of rubbish, picking up stone by stone, and carrying them outside of the lines and close by them, so as to form a wall, on the 3 inland sides. Just within this wall, a perfectly level and smooth walk is formed from 6 to 8 feet wide and extending around the encampment, this serving the purpose of a general promenade. The next process is to partition out the whole area into small squares, exactly equal in size. This is done by forming narrow paths, very smooth, and crossing each other at right angles throughout the entire extent of the rookery. At each intersection of these paths, the nest of an albatross is constructed, and a penguin's nest in the center of each square. Thus every penguin is surrounded by 4 albatrosses, and each albatross by a like number of penguins. The penguin's nest consists of a hole in the earth, very shallow, being only just of sufficient depth to keep her single egg from rolling. The albatross is somewhat less simple in her arrangements, erecting a hillock about a foot high and 2 in diameter. This is made of earth, seaweed, and shells. On its summit, she builds her nest. The birds take especial care never to leave their nests unoccupied for an instant during the period of incubation, or indeed until the young progeny are sufficiently strong to take care of themselves. While the male is absent at sea in search of food, the female remains on duty, and it is only upon the return of her partner that she ventures abroad. The eggs are never left uncovered at all. While one bird leaves the nest, the other nestling in by its side. The precaution is rendered necessary by the thieving propensities prevalent in the rookery, the inhabitants making no scruple to purloin each other's eggs at every good opportunity. Although there are some rookeries in which the penguin and albatross are the sole population, yet in most of them a variety of oceanic birds are to be met with, enjoying all the privileges of citizenship and scattering their nests here and there wherever they can find room, never interfering, however, with the stations of the larger species. The appearance of such encampments, which, when seen from a distance, is exceedingly singular. The whole atmosphere just above the settlement is darkened with the immense number of the albatross, mingled with the smaller tribes, which are continually hovering over it, either going to the ocean or returning home. At the same time, a crowd of penguins are to be observed, some passing to and fro in the narrow alleys, and some marching with the military strut so peculiar to them around the general promenade ground which encircles the rookery. In short, survey it as we will, nothing can be more astonishing than the spirit of reflection evinced by these feathered beings, and nothing surely can be better calculated to elicit reflection in every well-regulated human intellect. On the morning of our arrival in Christmas Harbour, the chief mate, Mr. Patterson, took the boats, and, although it was somewhat early in the season, went in search of seal, leaving the captain and a young relation of his on a point of barren land to the westward, they having some business, whose nature I could not ascertain, to transact in the interior of the island. Captain Guy took with him a bottle, in which was a sealed letter, and made his way from the point on which he was set on shore toward one of the highest peaks in the place. It is probable that his design was to leave the letter on that height for some vessel which he expected to come after him. As soon as we lost sight of him, we proceeded, Peters and myself being in the mate's boat, on our cruise around the coast looking for seal. In this business we were occupied about 3 weeks, examining with great care every nook and corner, not only of Kerguelen's land, but of the several small islands in the vicinity. Our labours, however, were not crowned with any important success. We saw a great many fur seal, but they were exceedingly shy, and with the greatest exertions we could only procure 350 skins in all. Sea elephants were abundant, especially on the western coast of the mainland, but of these we killed only 20, and this with great difficulty. On the smaller islands we discovered a good many of the hair seal, but did not molest them. We returned to the schooner on the 11th, where we found Captain Guy and his nephew, who gave a very bad account of the interior, representing it as one of the most dreary and utterly barren countries of the world. They had remained 2 nights on the island, owing to some misunderstanding on the part of the second mate in regard to the sending of a jolly boat from the schooner to take them off. Chapter 15. On the 12th, we made sail from Christmas Harbour, retracing our way to the westward, and leaving Marion's Island, one of Crozett's group, on the larboard. We afterward passed Prince Edward's Island, leaving it also on our left, and then, steering more to the northward, made in 15 days the islands of Tristan da Cunha, in latitude 37 degrees 8 minutes south, longitude 12 degrees 8 minutes west. This group, now so well known and which consists of 3 circular islands, was first discovered by the Portuguese and was visited afterward by the Dutch in 1643 and by the French in 1767. The 3 islands together form a triangle and are distant from each other about 10 miles, there being fine open passages between them. In the land in all of them is very high, especially in Tristan da Cunha, properly so called. This is the largest of the group, being 15 miles in circumference, and so elevated that it can be seen in clear weather at the distance of 80 or 90 miles. A part of the land toward the north rises more than 1,000 feet perpendicularly from the sea. A tableland at this height extends back nearly to the center of the island, and from this tableland arises a lofty cone like that of Tenerife. The lower half of this cone is clothed with trees of good size, but the upper region is barren rock, usually hidden among the clouds, and covered with snow during the greater part of the year. There are no shoals or other dangers about the island, the shores being remarkably bold and the water deep. On the northwestern coast is a bay with a beach of black sand, where a landing with boats can be easily effected, provided there be a southerly wind. Plenty of excellent water may here be readily procured. Also cod and other fish may be taken with hook and line. The next island in point of size, and the most westwardly of the group, is that called the Inaccessible. Its precise situation is 37 degrees 17 minutes south latitude, longitude 12 degrees 24 minutes west. It is 7 or 8 miles in circumference, and on all sides presents a forbidding and precipitous aspect. Its top is perfectly flat, and the whole region is sterile, nothing growing upon it except a few stunted shrubs. Nightingale Island, the smallest and most southerly, is in latitude 37 degrees 26 minutes south, longitude 12 degrees 17 minutes west. Off its southern extremity is a high ledge of rocky islets. A few also of a similar appearance are seen to the northeast. The ground is irregular and sterile, and a deep valley partially separates it. The shores of these islands abound in the proper season with sea lions, sea elephants, the hair and fur seal, together with a great variety of oceanic birds. Whales are also plenty in their vicinity. Owing to the ease with which these various animals were here formerly taken, the group has been much visited since its discovery. The Dutch and French frequented it at a very early period. In 1790, Captain Patton of the ship Industry of Philadelphia made Tristan da Cunha, where he remained 7 months, from August 1790 to April 1791, for the purpose of collecting sealskins. In this time he gathered no less than 5,600, and says that he would have had no difficulty in loading a large ship with oil in 3 weeks. Upon his arrival he found no quadrupeds, with the exception of a few wild goats. The island now abounds with all our most valuable domestic animals, which have been introduced by subsequent navigators. I believe it was not long after Captain Patton's visit that Captain Colquhoun of the American brig Betsy touched at the largest of the islands for the purpose of refreshment. He planted onions, potatoes, cabbages, and a great many other vegetables, an abundance of all which is now to be met with. In 1811, a Captain Hayward in the Nereus visited Tristan. He found there 3 Americans who were residing upon the island to prepare sealskins in oil. One of these men was named Jonathan Lambert, and he called himself the sovereign of the country. He had cleared and cultivated about 60 acres of land, and turned his attention to raising the coffee plant and sugar cane, with which he had been furnished by the American minister at Rio Janeiro. This settlement, however, was finally abandoned, and in 1817 the islands were taken possession of by the British government, who sent a detachment for that purpose from the Cape of Good Hope. They did not, however, retain them long, but upon the evacuation of the country as a British possession, 2 or 3 English families took up their residence there independently of the government. On the 25th of March, 1824, the Berwick, Captain Jeffrey, from London to Van Diemen's Land, arrived at the place, where they found an Englishman of the name of Glass, formerly a corporal in the British artillery. He claimed to be supreme governor of the islands, and had under his control 21 men and 3 women. He gave a very favorable account of the salubrity of the climate and of the productiveness of the soil. The population occupied themselves chiefly in collecting sealskins and sea elephant oil, with which they traded to the Cape of Good Hope, Glass owning a small schooner. At the period of our arrival, the governor was still a resident, but his little community had multiplied, there being 56 persons upon Tristan, besides a smaller settlement of 7 on Nightingale Island. We had no difficulty in procuring almost every kind of refreshment which we required. Sheep, hogs, bullocks, rabbits, poultry, goats, fish in great variety, and vegetables were abundant. Having come to anchor close in with the large island, in 18 fathoms, we took all we wanted on board very conveniently. Captain Guy also purchased of Glass 500 sealskins and some ivory. We remained here a week, during which the prevailing winds were from the northward and westward, and the weather somewhat hazy. On the 5th of November we made sail to the southward and westward, with the intention of having a thorough search of a group of islands called the Auroras, respecting whose existence a great diversity of opinion has existed. These islands are said to have been discovered as early as 1762 by the commander of the ship Aurora. In 1790, Captain Manuel de Oyarvido, in the ship Princess, belonging to the Royal Philippine Company, sailed, as he asserts, directly among them. In 1794, the Spanish corvette Atrevida went with the determination of ascertaining their precise situation, and in a paper published by the Royal Hydrographical Society of Madrid in the year 1809, the following language is used respecting this expedition. The corvette Atrevida practiced in their immediate vicinity from the 21st to the 27th of January all the necessary observations, and measured by chronometers the difference of longitude between these islands and the port of Soledad and the Manillas. The islands are 3, they are very nearly in the same meridian. The center one is rather low, and the other 2 may be seen at 9 leagues distance. The observations made on board the Atrevida give the following results as the precise situation of each island. The most northern is in latitude 52 degrees, 37 minutes, 24 seconds south, longitude 47 degrees, 43 minutes, 15 seconds west. The middle one in latitude 53 degrees, 2 minutes, 40 seconds south, longitude 47 degrees, 55 minutes, 15 seconds west, and the most southern in latitude 53 degrees, 15 minutes, 22 seconds south, longitude 47 degrees, 57 minutes, 15 seconds west. On the 27th of January, 1820, Captain James Weddell of the British Navy sailed from Staten Land also in search of the Auroras. He reports that, having made the most diligent search and passed not only immediately over the spots indicated by the commander of the Atrevida, but in every direction throughout the vicinity of these spots, he could not discover no indication of land. These conflicting statements have induced other navigators to look out for the islands, and strange to say, while some have sailed through every inch of the sea where they are supposed to lie without finding them, there have been not a few who declare positively that they have seen them, and even been close in with their shores. It was Captain Guy's intention to make every exertion within his power to settle the question so oddly in dispute. There's a footnote here. Among the vessels which at various times have professed to meet with the Auroras may be mentioned the ship San Miguel in 1769, the ship Aurora in 1774, the brig Pearl in 1779, and the ship Dolores in 1790. They all agree in giving the mean latitude 53 degrees south. We kept on our course between the south and west with variable weather until the 20th of the month, when we found ourselves on the debated ground, being in latitude 53 degrees 15 minutes south, longitude 47 degrees 58 minutes west, that is to say, very nearly upon the spot indicated as the situation of the most southern of the group. Not perceiving any sign of land, we continued to the westward of the parallel of 53 degrees south, as far as the meridian of 50 degrees west. We then stood to the north as far as the parallel of 52 degrees south, when we turned to the eastward, and kept our parallel by double altitudes, morning and evening, and meridian altitudes of the planets and moon. Having thus gone eastwardly to the meridian of the western coast of Georgia, we kept that meridian until we were in the latitude from which we set out. We then took diagonal courses throughout the entire extent of the sea circumscribed, keeping a lookout constantly at the masthead, and repeating our examination with the greatest care for a period of 3 weeks, during which the weather was remarkably pleasant and fair, with no haze whatsoever. Of course, we were thoroughly satisfied that whatever islands might have existed in this vicinity at any former period, no vestige of them remained at the present day. Since my return home, I find that the same ground was traced over with equal care in 1822 by Captain Johnson of the American schooner Henry, and by Captain Morrill in the American schooner Wasp, in both cases. The same result as our own. Chapter 16. It had been Captain Guy's original intention, after satisfying himself about the auroras, to proceed through the Strait of Magellan and up along the western coast of Patagonia, but information received at Tristan da Cunha induced him to steer to the southward, in the hope of falling in with some small islands said to lie about the parallel of 60 degrees south, longitude 41 degrees 20 minutes west. In the event of his not discovering these lands, he designed, should the season prove favorable, to push on towards the pole. According to the 12th of December, we made sail in that direction. Accordingly, on the 12th of December, we made sail in that direction. On the 18th, we found ourselves about the station indicated by Glass and cruised for 3 days in that neighborhood without finding any traces of the islands he'd mentioned. On the 21st, the weather being unusually pleasant, we again made sail to the southward with the resolution of penetrating in that course as far as possible. Before entering upon this portion of my narrative, it may be as well, for the information of those readers who have paid little attention to the progress of discovery in these regions, to give some brief account of the very few attempts at reaching the southern pole which have hitherto been made. That of Captain Cook was the first of which we have any distinct account. In 1772, he sailed to the south in the Resolution, accompanied by Lieutenant Furneaux in the Adventure. In December, he found himself as far as the 58th parallel of south latitude and in longitude 26 degrees 57 minutes east. Here he met with narrow fields of ice, about 8 or 10 inches thick and running northwest and southeast. This ice was in large cakes, and usually it was packed so closely that the vessel had great difficulty in forcing a passage. At this period, Captain Cook supposed, from the vast number of birds to be seen, and from other indications, that he was in the near vicinity of land. He kept on to the southward, the weather being exceedingly cool, until he reached the 64th parallel in longitude 38 degrees 14 minutes east. Here he had mild weather with gentle breezes for 5 days, the thermometer being at 36. In January 1773, the vessels crossed the Antarctic Circle, but did not succeed in penetrating much farther. For upon reaching latitude 67 degrees 15 minutes, they found all farther progress impeded by an immense body of ice, extending all along the southern horizon as far as the eye could reach. This ice was of every variety, and some large floes of it, miles in extent, formed a compact mass, rising 18 or 20 feet above the water. It being late in the season, and no hope entertained of rounding these obstructions, Captain Cook now reluctantly turned to the northward. In the November following, he renewed his search in the Antarctic. In latitude 59 degrees 40 minutes, he met with a strong current setting to the southward. In December, when the vessels were in latitude 67 degrees 31 minutes, longitude 142 degrees 54 minutes west, the cold was excessive, with heavy gales and fog. Here also birds were abundant, the albatross, the penguin, and the petrel especially. In latitude 70 degrees 23 minutes, some large islands of ice were encountered, and shortly afterward the clouds to the southward were observed to be of a snowy whiteness, indicating the vicinity of field ice. In latitude 71 degrees 10 minutes, longitude 106 degrees 54 minutes west, the navigators were stopped as before by an immense frozen expanse, which filled the whole area of the southern horizon. The northern edge of this expanse was ragged and broken, so firmly wedged together as to be utterly impassable, and extending about a mile to the southward. Behind it, the frozen surface was comparatively smooth for some distance, until it terminated in the extreme background by gigantic ranges of ice mountains, the one towering above the other. Captain Cook concluded that this vast field reached the southern pole, or was joined to a continent. Mr. J. N. Reynolds, whose great exertions and perseverance have at length succeeded in getting set on foot a national expedition, partly for the purpose of exploring these regions, thus speaks of the attempt of the Resolution. We are not surprised that Captain Cook was unable to go beyond 71 degrees 10 minutes, but we are astonished that he did attain that point on the meridian of 106 degrees 54 minutes west longitude. Palmer's Land lies south of the Shetland, latitude 64 degrees, and tends to the southward and westward, farther than any navigator has yet penetrated. Cook was standing for this land when his progress was arrested by the ice, which we apprehend must always be the case in that point, and so early in the season as the 6th of January. And we should not be surprised if a portion of the icy mountains described was attached to the main body of Palmer's Land, or to some other portions of land lying farther to the southward and westward. In 1803, Captains Kreutzenstern and Lisielski were dispatched by Alexander of Russia for the purpose of circumnavigating the globe. In endeavoring to get south, they made no farther than 59 degrees 58 minutes, in longitude 70 degrees 15 minutes west. They here met with strong currents setting eastwardly. Whales were abundant, but they saw no ice. In regard to this voyage, Mr. Reynolds observes that if Kreutzenstern had arrived where he did earlier in the season, he must have encountered ice. It was March when he reached the latitude specified. The winds, prevailing as they do from the southward and westward, had carried the floes, aided by currents, into that icy region bounded on the north by Georgia, east by Sandwich Land and the South Orkneys, and west by the South Shetland Islands. In 1822, Captain James Weddell of the British Navy, with 2 very small vessels, penetrated farther to the south than any previous navigator, and this too without encountering extraordinary difficulties. He states that although he was frequently hemmed in by ice before reaching the 72nd parallel, yet upon attaining it not a particle was to be discovered, and that upon arriving at the latitude of 74 degrees 15 minutes, no fields and only 3 islands of ice were visible. It is somewhat remarkable that although vast flocks of birds were seen, and other usual indications of land, and although south of the Shetlands unknown coasts were observed from the masthead tending southwardly, Weddell discourages the idea of land existing in the polar regions of the south. On the 11th of January, 1823, Captain Benjamin Morrill, of the American schooner Wasp, sailed from Kerguelen's Land with a view of penetrating as far south as possible. On the 1st of February, he found himself in latitude 64 degrees 52 minutes south, longitude 118 degrees 27 minutes east. The following passage is extracted from his journal of that date. The wind soon freshened to an 11-knot breeze, and we embraced this opportunity of making to the west, being, however, convinced that the farther we went south beyond latitude 64 degrees, the less ice was to be apprehended. We steered a little to the southward, until we crossed the Antarctic Circle, and were in latitude 69 degrees 15 minutes east. In this latitude there was no field ice, and very few ice islands in sight. Under the date of March 14th, I find also this entry. The sea was now entirely free of field ice, and there were not more than a dozen ice islands in sight. At the same time, the temperature of the air and water was at least 13 degrees higher, more mild than we had ever found it between the parallels of 60 and 62 south. We were now in latitude 70 degrees 14 minutes south, and the temperature of the air was 47, and that of the water 44. In this situation, I found the variation to be 14 degrees 27 minutes easterly per azimuth. I have several times passed within the Antarctic Circle on different meridians, and have uniformly found the temperature, both of the air and the water, to become more and more mild the farther I advance beyond the 65th degree of south latitude, and that the variation decreases in the same proportion. While north of this latitude, say between 60 and 65 south, we frequently had great difficulty in finding a passage for the vessel between the immense and almost innumerable ice islands, some of which were from 1 to 2 miles in circumference, and more than 500 feet above the surface of the water. Being nearly destitute of fuel and water, and without proper instruments, it being also late in the season, Captain Morrill was now obliged to put back, without attempting any further progress to the westward, although an entirely open sea lay before him. He expresses the opinion that, had not these overruling considerations obliged him to retreat, he could have penetrated, if not to the pole itself, at least to the 85th parallel. I have given his ideas respecting these matters somewhat at length, that the reader may have an opportunity of seeing how far they were borne out by my own subsequent experience. In 1831, Captain Briscoe, in the employ of the Messrs. Enderby, whale ship owners of London, sailed in the brig Lively for the South Seas, accompanied by the cutter Tula. On the 28th of February, being in latitude 66 degrees 30 minutes south, longitude 47 degrees 31 minutes east, he descried land and clearly discovered through the snow the black peaks of a range of mountains running east-southeast. He remained in this neighborhood during the whole of the following month, but was unable to approach the coast nearer than within 10 leagues, owing to the boisterous state of the weather. Finding it impossible to make further discovery during this season, he returned northward to winter in Van Diemen's Land. In the beginning of 1832, he again proceeded southwardly, and on the 4th of February was seen to the southeast in latitude 67 degrees 15 minutes, longitude 69 degrees 29 minutes west. This was soon found to be an island near the headland of the country he had first discovered. On the 21st of the month, he succeeded in landing on the latter and took possession of it in the name of William IV, calling it Adelaide's Island, in honor of the English Queen. These particulars being made known to the Royal Geographical Society of London, the conclusion was drawn by that body that there is a continuous tract of land extending from 47 degrees 30 minutes east to 69 degrees 29 minutes west longitude, running the parallel of from 66 to 67 degrees south latitude. In respect to this conclusion, Mr. Reynolds observes, "In the correctness of it we may by no means concur, nor do the discoveries of Briscoe warrant any such inference. It was within these limits that Weddell proceeded south on a meridian to the east of George's, Sandwich Land, and the South Orkney and Shetland Islands." My own experience will be found to testify most directly to the falsity of the conclusion arrived at by the Society. These are the principal attempts which have been made at penetrating to a high southern latitude, and it will now be seen that there remained, previous to the voyage of the Jean, nearly 300 degrees of longitude in which the Antarctic Circle had not been crossed at all. Of course, a wide field lay before us for discovery, and it was with feelings of most intense interest that I heard Captain Guy express his resolution, pushing boldly to the southward.